Good morning. This is your second tutorial to help you walk through the research paper process. Last tutorial walked you through your part one of your paper. So the research paper itself will actually be four parts. Part one will be your introduction, which is kind of defining the importance of your topic. It's defining any components of your topic. So, for instance, if you were looking at GMOs or if you were looking at the wage gap, you would define what those are to your reader. You might provide a quote from a scholarly article that really sets the tone for why this topic is important. And in your introduction, unlike your writing prompts that you do here at the high school, in a research paper, you actually won't state your thesis in that introduction. That introduction is really just to define the importance, the background, and set the tone for what will be part two. Part two is a continuation of the paper, of the introduction of the paper, and it will continue to kind of set the tone in the background. But at the end of part two, you will clearly state your thesis statement. It will actually be the last thing you state in your part two section, along with your areas of proof that will support the supposition that you're making. Part three of your paper will be the defense of your thesis, and part four will be your conclusion, where you wrap up all of your main points, but you will do something different in your conclusion as well, which we'll talk about, which is you will include new avenues of research. So, part of what research does when you have a thesis is once you finish your research paper, you should define it, you should conclude it, but you should also talk about, okay, what now? Because remember, you're entering a conversation, and the goal is with research that you want your research to be meaningful and purposeful so that other people can build off of it. And that's kind of what we're learning with this. Okay, so with part two, this is really where you're going to start to do the context of thinking about my question that I'm asking. How has the past shaped the future? Now, that question was not to drive your thesis question, which I think some of you were confused about. It was actually to drive the purpose of why you're writing your thesis. And it's really considering how does history play into the arguments and stuff that are really going on in the world today. And so part two is going to be that exploration of history by providing historical context to the determination of how the evolution of history has shaped your topic. So, your job is to find 5 points in history over the course of the 20th, early 21st century that will show how the evolution of whatever history of your topic may be led you to the argument that you're developing now. So when I say 20th century, I would like you to go back as far as you can in the 1900s and work your way up to present day. Now, I understand that some of your topics may be newer, such as if you're looking at like GMOs. So you'll have to think a little more creatively about how can you go back beyond like the 1980s and 70s to really go back to the early 1900s. You might want to consider like food legislation. If you're doing vaccines, you could think about like who created the vaccines, what was the public's early response to that. Like you want to think creatively about how you can show 5 points in history, 5 crucial points, not just random events, but 5 defining moments that led you to the point that you're at with your thesis. Now, the question is, can you do more than 5 points? Yes. But 5 is the minimum that I'm requiring to show evolution, because the goal is we're trying to prove that many aspects of the past shape things that are occurring today. It wasn't like people just woke up today and all of a sudden started making these arguments. So on your note sheet, I have provided an A, B, C, D, E to help you remember to do those 5 points. If you want to add more than that, feel free. After every single event or topic, please make sure to do a bibliography and also to do an in-text citation, both in MLA format. You should be adding to your ongoing bibliography in your folder. If you have not created one, you should create one immediately. That is so crucial to making sure that you pass Comp 2 for this project. And for your sources, you really want to consider academic or professionally appropriate sources for research. Most likely, I like you to use academic or peer-reviewed articles. I don't mind if you use encyclopedia, if you use Supreme Court websites, the United, like Library of Congress, PBS. If you're going to news websites, think about NPR, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, really qualified articles, and make sure you're not using editorials or blogs from those, because sometimes they will have like an editor's note and opinion page. That should not be your use of scholarly articles to defend the thesis that you're coming up with. Okay, so what can you use to think about? You could think about relevant legislation. Have there been crucial laws that have been passed that have really formulated what has led to the controversy or argument of your topic? Supreme Court cases. Is there any aspects of constitutionality with your topic? And searching that will help you. Typing in what your topic is in Supreme Court cases, you might come up with some great stuff. If your topic doesn't have anything to do with constitutionality, then obviously you wouldn't look for Supreme Court cases. Crucial stories. These can include individuals, people, prolific figures, prolific events that have really been evolutionary in forming your topic. And like I said, you really want to make sure I use the word crucial and not just stories. I don't want just random things that really have no historical basis. You maybe find it in an article that says like 1947, this guy did this. But if you can't find it anywhere else, is it really that crucial? So just be mindful of what you're choosing for people and stories to support your statements. And then events. This can be historical events. It might be interesting to use your textbook and look at basically from the 1900s on, are there historical events that you could tie into what you've already learned from classes and put that in? And obviously you can use that as a source, but build off of there by finding another source to back up what the textbook says. Events can also include kind of with crucial stories, but these are more like historical events. The signing of something, a particular protest, a particular event. You play into what you will. With that said, my list is not exhaustive. You might think of something else that you can come up with. Maybe it's a medical study. Maybe it's something that happens that will fit into the ideology of historical evolution. Now, I've also put statistics. So there might have been studies that have been done that have found statistics like in 1949, they found this statistic. That's perfectly acceptable. I don't want a list of 5 different statistics, but I don't mind if you include like a survey, a demographic, a graph itself, like something to do with like Pew Research as part of this historical evolution. So it doesn't just have to be narrative based. You can also use quantitative data as well. Okay. So once you've finished your 5 points, at the end of part 2, you will clearly state your thesis. And many of you were creating very narrow focused questions. And I told you to keep those questions because that might help you articulate a very well defined thesis. So your question might be very simple and broad. Your thesis, though, should really narrow into what your argument is going to be about that really broad question. And so, as I've stated before, this is almost like a funnel. Your part 1 is really the broad definition of your question and kind of what your topic is. Part 2 is funneling into, okay, we're now going to go through the history of this leading to my specific thesis. And then from there, part 3 will really be the entire part 3 is going to be 6 scholarly pieces of evidence that clearly defend with specs and analysis, that clearly defend the thesis that you're writing. Part 3 will be indicative of the writing that we've been doing all trimester, really on purpose, so that you understand the context of how to write a strong defense to a thesis statement. Okay, I hope this helps with the next step. I cannot stress enough, May 12th is coming ever faster. And remember, I will be putting out these weekly tutorials. So you'll actually have one next week while you're on vacation about how to do parts of your paper so that you can really start considering getting into this. But the goal is by May 12th, your bibliography and these research paper notes are due. So that is a Sunday and they will be due at midnight. So please don't forget that deadline is coming ever quicker. And then from there, I'm going to have you formulate and put it into a paper. So by meeting that deadline, it's crucial because the next step is you're going to be writing an annotated bibliography. And the only way you can write that is if you have finished all of these parts. So with that, I hope this helps. And as always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Good luck.